Couple of Sundays will be our Week of Compassion Special Day Offering. This is that part of our denomination that responds in emergencies. There have been dollars already going to those that are affected by the storm on the East Coast. That's what amazes me. I wake up, I look at the news, I've seen something happening, I go to Week of Compassion's website and I find out that there are already dollars responding to needs. And so every year at this time, again, next Sunday and the following Sunday, we collect money to go to Week of Compassion to support their ongoing ministry, whether it is just down the road or halfway around the globe. It's an amazing group that works in conjunction with many other denominations and groups through church world service, stretching those dollars and making amazing things happen. So I hope that you will be mindful of that over the next couple weeks and will consider a generous gift. This morning we are looking at Luke's Gospel, the 9th chapter. And I invite you to hear these words. About 8 days after Jesus said these things, he took Peter, John, and James, and went up on a mountain to pray. As he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes flashed white with lightning. 2 men, Moses and Elijah, were talking with him. They were clothed with heavenly splendor and spoke about Jesus' departure, which he would achieve in Jerusalem. Peter and those with him were almost overcome by sleep, but they managed to stay awake and saw his glory as well as the 2 men with him. As the 2 men, though, were leaving, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, it is good that we are here. We should construct 3 shrines, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah." But Peter didn't know what he was saying. Yet he was still speaking when the cloud overshadowed them. As they entered the cloud, they were overcome with awe. Then a voice from the cloud said, "This is my son, my chosen one. Listen to him." Even as the voice spoke, Jesus was found alone. The disciples were speechless, and at the time, they told no one what they had seen. May our spirits encounter within these words the transformative presence and power of our God. This is our request. Thanks be to God. You pray with me? Make us, O Lord. Form us anew. Change us from the inside out, in the same way that you transformed the presence of Jesus. Amen. In 2005, the General Assembly of our denomination, the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, was in Portland, Oregon. My family had never been there before, so we went out a few days early. We're able to travel along the coast and just see the beauty of that part of the country. But we got back to Portland, to the hotel Friday night, even though the assembly didn't start until Saturday night, because I had read that there was a race, a 10-mile race, what would be up in the hills of this wonderful park, forest park, the biggest urban forest in the United States, there in Portland. And they were going to have this race that I wanted to participate in. It was going to be a trail run among the 5,500 acres of this park. I got there early that Saturday morning. And I was surprised to find that only about, 60, 70 people showed up for the run. It was a bit foggy, misty. And they explained to us that along the trail there would be these green ribbons marking the path where we were to run. They set us off, and I quickly found myself about third or fourth, though the guys ahead of me were way ahead of me. What I didn't know going into the race was that the first 4 miles were uphill. It was tough. Though about 2 miles into the race, I kept on coming to these forks in the road, and there was no green ribbon marking. It was still foggy and misty, and I was constantly kind of trying to guess which way to go. Though usually I could tell the path was wider, it was more worn. I figured that was it. And I get down the path and there'd be the green ribbon. I knew I was on the right path. But about 3 miles into it, I came to a fork that I couldn't decide. I just stood there running in place, trying to decide which way to turn. And suddenly out of the fog, a voice said, "It's this way, stupid." Now, it's important to note that the sermon is entitled, "It's This Way, Silly," because in my household, we don't use that word. When my son was in kindergarten, he came home and said, "Dad, I heard the S word." And I said, "What was it?" "I can't say it. You can tell me this one time." "Stupid." You're right, we do not say that. I wish that was the only S word he would hear at school. Nonetheless, out of the fog, I hear this voice say, "It's this way, stupid." And I go that direction. But it wasn't about 10 feet down that path I realized I just followed a voice into the fog in the midst of a forest that I don't know where I am going. A bit intimidating. But I kept on going, and there was one of those green ribbons. And so I kept on going, and I got over the edge and headed back down, and the fog began to clear, and it became easier to see those ribbons ahead. And I made my way to the end. A voice. It's this way. It is the story of transfiguration, the story of transformation, with this voice that is beckoning us, beckoning the 3 disciples that had gone to the mountain to come, to go this way. It's this way, silly, is what the voice is basically saying. And today is Transfiguration Sunday, the day that we look at that passage in the different Gospels in which Jesus is transfigured or transformed or changed before the disciples. But might I suggest that the story really has less to do with the transformation of Jesus and more to do with the transformation of the disciples. Sure, the moment was an amazing moment where Jesus physically changed, but because they were there, because of their encounter, they were the ones who were changed. And yet there they stood on the mountain, transfixed by what was happening, like moths gazing into a streetlight. And I just picture in that moment Jesus going, "Hey, it's this way, silly." Jesus would have used silly. I don't think stupid's in the divine vocabulary. "This way, silly, come." And even in the conversation between Jesus and Elijah and Moses there on the mountain, it says that they spoke about his departure that would occur in Jerusalem. It's one of those moments where our English translation kind of loses the meaning, because in the original Greek of this passage, the word that we translate as departure, the word in Greek is exodos, where the word exodus comes from. Jesus is meeting with Moses, and they are talking about his exodus, this moment of leading people into liberation, this moment of guiding people into new life. And Jesus is beckoning them toward Jerusalem, toward the cross, toward that act of selfless love. As we get closer to the season of Lent, that begins actually this Wednesday with Ash Wednesday, I believe God is beckoning us. It's this way, folks. It's this way. But how do we get there? I would suggest that there are three compelling ideas in this passage that help us. And the first one almost seems silly to state, But the passage says that they were a people of prayer. In fact, it begins in the first verse that I read that they went up to the mountain to pray. But what I love is in the next very verse, it says that they were praying. How many of us can be entering into a moment with the best intentions to pray, but we never get around to it? We set the alarm 15 minutes early so that we can get up to pray, but when the alarm goes off, we hit the snooze. We set up this nice little area to pray, and we have a candle, and yet we spent all the time we had set aside for prayer looking for matches to light the candle. We buy a devotional book, and yet it sits by our bedside and it is never opened. I think of the language of a coach to his players: you need to work on your follow-through. The season of Lent is about working on our follow-through, about being intentional in regard to those things that we have planned to do, of working at it. And what I love about the passage is that three of them go up together. There is something about being in community, about being with people who will hold us accountable, who will help us with that. It's one thing to hit the snooze and go back to sleep, but if you know there's somebody that's going to be calling, or if you know that there's somebody who is waiting for you at the breakfast place and you were going to pray, it motivates you, it gets you up. And what is important to remember about prayer is that prayer is not our opportunity to try to talk God into something. It's not about trying to change God's mind. It's about opening ourselves up and allowing God to change us. We need to allow God, and that's what God is doing there on the mountain. God is reorienting the people so that they can recognize God's beckoning. It's this way, folks. It's this way. But along with prayer, in verse 32, I find the second thing that is important. We read these words: "Now Peter and his companions were weighed down with sleep." Why is it that at important points in the stories of Jesus, that the disciples, the followers of Jesus, seem to be falling asleep? I mean, I guess I can understand it. They've been walking up this mountain. They have to be exhausted. But here they are at this amazing moment by invitation of Jesus to go up there, and they are dozing off. Notice, though, it says that they were weighed down with sleep. Now, the word sleep in the scriptures isn't just about sleep. It's about closing eyes. It's about not recognizing. It's a metaphor for those that don't see what is really going on. Well, how many of us are pressed down, weighed down by something that doesn't allow us to see the amazing thing that is happening right there in front of us? How many of us know that? For 40 years after the Exodus, the Israelites wandered in the wilderness, often weighed down by things in their journey. We are entering Lent, 40 days of wandering in the wilderness with Jesus in that journey to the Jerusalem and to the cross. What kind of tough choices will we need to make to lighten the load, to make ourselves more available? For 6 or 7 years, I led a group every spring break, a group of youth, to New York and DC on the International Affairs Seminar. It was a great experience for us to talk about faith issues in light of what was happening in our country and around the globe. Every year, we would mail out to the participants what they should bring. At the top of the list and at the bottom of the list in bold print, pack light. Recommending, a small backpack because we were going to be traveling by subway and we were going to have to be moving quickly. And every year, every single participant showed up with these monstrous duffel bags, usually one or two carry-ons and a backpack. And I tell you, when we arrived at the airport, got on the subway and tried to travel in New York City with that mass of stuff, and then when they made their way up out of the subway, watching this group just carry it, There was one exception, though. A farm kid from Kansas showed up with this small backpack with all of his stuff, everything he needed. And it was like a living parable that year as we came out of the subway and walked to our hotel, which is still about a mile away. All of our kids, first time in New York, and they're like this. Except for him. His head is up. He's taking it in. He's experiencing it. How many of us are weighed down by something that does not allow us to see what is all around us, what God is doing? We need to pack light, travel light, if we plan to see the light, be the light, and spread the light. Prayer, packing light. The third thing I see in this passage that is important is when that cloud came over them and the voice affirms who Jesus is. And then it adds that ending line, and listen to him. And if they listen, they will notice that it's Jesus saying, okay, folks, it's this way. But not Peter. Peter is ready to build 3 permanent dwellings there. One for Jesus, one for Moses, one for Elijah, because my goodness, he's having this amazing experience and he doesn't want to leave. And why would he? I mean, it's this marvelous moment of faith. And yet Jesus is saying, come, come. How many of us are ready to build a memorial edifice, to more firmly entrench ourselves right where we are, and yet it is something that doesn't allow us to move forward? When I was still doing youth ministry, there was a point where 3 of the high school youth in my church were in a musical. And on the closing night, I went to the musical, but they had asked if I would stay that evening afterwards. They were going to have an after party and they needed sponsors. And I said, sure. And as I hung out with them that night, I was intrigued that even though the spotlights were turned off, they stood on the stage, they hung out on the stage for a number of hours, reenacting their experience, retelling stories about what had happened. And you could just tell they didn't want to go home. They didn't want to leave this experience. They had had this marvelous time for 7 or 8 weeks of coming together, of growing together, of learning this musical. They had come together as community and they couldn't imagine it coming to an end. And so they kept on trying to hold on to that. And yet the gift of that experience was a gift that needed to be shared outside the wall. They were changed people because of that experience. And in light of that change, they needed to be out in the world, sharing that experience. If you notice, water runs down a mountain and nourishes those in the valley. We need to recognize that even though we have these powerful experiences, Jesus is beckoning us. Come on, folks. Let's head down the mountain. Come on, folks. It's this way. The season of Lent that begins with Ash Wednesday, this coming Wednesday, is a gritty, earthy, real and honest experience for those that are willing to step off the mountain and to begin that journey to Jerusalem and to the cross. It's 40 days of in the wilderness with Jesus, preparing ourselves, making ourselves ready through prayer, through lightening the load, and making sure that we do not set down roots that are going to hold us where we are and keep us from following Jesus. Because Jesus is always saying, it's this way, folks. It's this way. When I finished that race in Portland, Oregon, I don't know where I finished, 3rd, 4th among a pretty small group, but 20 minutes later, 25 minutes later maybe, there were only about a dozen of us who had finished. And as we started to talk, and we all talked about having a difficult time determining, we realized that there were probably many folks that were lost up on the trails. And a guy who knew the paths, he said, I'm pretty sure I know where some of them got lost. And he sent a few of us up one path, a few of us up another to go searching for these folks. It didn't take me long, about 10 minutes up this path, and there I could see a group of them just kind of wandering, looking. And so I directed them, and we started walking down. And as we were, I told them the story of getting to that point and having a voice say, it's this way, stupid. And one of them said, boy, I wish I would have heard that voice. Well, there is a voice that's beckoning us, calling us as we enter into the season and saying, hey, come this way. It's this way. Follow me to Jerusalem, to the cross, to the act of selfless love. You pray with me? Amazing and grace-filled God, your light, your love, they change us. They transform us in the same way that you begin to transform those disciples. Set before us a new exodus, a pathway that, yes, leads to Jerusalem and to the cross, but leads to that amazing act of selfless love that changes us, that transforms us. But we cannot get there, God, if we do not listen. Listen to your voice. Listen to the beckoning of the presence of Jesus in our lives. God, we want to be made more aware. We want to be a people who say, okay, I'm ready. But as we go, as we journey, God, we ask you to walk with us, encouraging us, helping us make this way, as difficult as it might be sometimes. God, as we are in prayer, we lift up many within the life of our congregation who are in need of prayer. We lift up Gail and Linda, Ann, Beverly, Jan, and Dave. We lift up others who are the family and friends of members within this congregation, for as one within us is hurting or afraid, we are all hurting and afraid. And yet, God, it is your Spirit that works through a community such as this and begins to do amazing things. Continue to encourage us. Continue to be patient with us, God. Continue to extend that invitation. It's this way, folks. And in faith, God, we'll follow. We offer these words of prayer in the name of Jesus. Amen.